Dorian, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and for talking about the book, which, by the way, makes a great holiday gift. We're entering the holiday season, whatever holiday you want. I did want to add just one little element to the introduction. I've also spent a fair amount of time in both polling and comedy, and I was the first Comedy Central pollster back in 1992 when we inaugurated Indecision 92. And I just want to mention the first poll that I did. Back then, it was the rage in all the networks to get 900 phone numbers and tell people to pay 75 cents to call in to register their opinion on an issue. So I secured a 900 number, and we asked our viewers the following question: would you pay 75 cents to call in to register your opinion on an issue? And we were flooded with calls, and 97% said no. So I mention that as a cautionary note as you look at polls this day. Today is day 315 of the Trump presidency, or as Trump says, longer than any other president. And of course, we're here at an auspicious time. It's following Thanksgiving, where Trump did as presidents do and pardoned turkeys. And then a couple of hours later, he went on Twitter to complain that they had not been grateful enough. I have been actually thinking about the last few days, because we had Thanksgiving Thursday, and then we had Black Friday, and then we had Small Business Saturday, and we had Cyber Monday, and we have Giving Tuesday. And today I want to create a new day for the president. From now on, it should be Narcissistic Sociopathy Wednesday. Before the election, I would tell my nervous friends not to be all that upset, because if he ever did get elected, before long he would leave us for a younger country. But I can no longer say that's the case, I'm afraid. And what I'd like to do in my time here, and I'm sorry that my friend Chris Murphy is back having to cast a number of futile votes where we will see Democrats beaten back time and again as we approach what will be, I'm afraid, a horrible set of votes on this more than horrible tax bill as we go forward. But I want to talk about a few things that are related to the book, but more generally. And first, I want to talk about the danger that we all face right now, and I believe it is an existential threat to everything that we believed in and the values we hold in this country. I want to start with a larger point, which is this didn't start with Trump, and it won't end with Trump. The roots that brought us to a point where a Donald Trump, a talk show, reality TV barker, and real estate phony mogul, could win a nomination and then win an election, go back many decades. And we could look at the roots of some of the economic distress and racial division in the country, the tribalism that was really generated by Newt Gingrich starting in the 1970s, which also began the attack on facts and science that continue and are escalated now in this day and age, the demonization of Washington and everything related to government, and the blatant appeals to racism that have continued over a period of time that he exploited, especially something that becomes more of a vulnerability whenever you have a difficult economic time, and the populism that emerges that has a dark side to it across the political spectrum that we saw with the financial collapse in 2008. And it's important to say that imagining a world without Trump requires us also to imagine a world without Pence, a world without Ryan, a world without McConnell, because if Trump were to disappear tomorrow, these issues, these difficulties, these tensions, the fundamental threat to our system would not go away. We have a much bigger and longer-term battle that we have to deal with. Now, just a few words on what we face right now. And I'm going to start with three words: autocracy, kleptocracy, and kakistocracy. The first two are familiar, and I'll talk in a little bit about the third, which is less familiar to people. The autocracy. What we're seeing now and what we've seen, which is especially troubling because so many of us thought that what had happened in Germany and Italy in the 1930s, what we've seen happening in Eastern Europe, and even with some of the stresses in other countries that we know about, from Turkey on through even some of the challenges in Western Europe, could never happen here, can happen here. And we know what the signs are that lead to an autocracy, which doesn't happen overnight. It is a set of tiny steps moving you gradually. And my friend Jim Fallows always cautions against using this analogy, but I ignore his cautions frequently, very much like the frog in the pot of cold water, degree by degree, not realizing until it's close to boiling what the danger is. And we know it starts with attacks on the legitimacy of the free press. And when you have Trump calling the press the enemy of the people, a term originated by Stalin and shunned by Khrushchev when he became premier because it was too dangerous to use, now adopted by Trump. But it goes beyond Trump attacking CNN, and now in what is a particularly dangerous and pernicious and awful move, going after CNN International. And now we're seeing foreign dictators and oligarchs taking CNN International and trying to use it for their own purposes to extend their evil rule. But it also gets to another reality, which is we are having billionaires now try and do a takeover of the free and mainstream press as well. And it's Trump attacking the merger of AT&T and Time Warner, legitimate reasons to look at that, but attacking it simply as a way of trying to dislodge CNN, discredit it, and maybe turn it over to a Murdoch type who would transform it in a different direction. It is a Federal Communications Commission under a chair where the focus has been what most of us would view as a terrible threat to net neutrality, which has hid what may even be a larger threat, which is Sinclair Broadcasting basically achieving an effective monopoly in large numbers of cities in the country, and an ownership team that has been more than willing to dictate the terms of news on their television stations. And it gets to the Koch brothers being behind the purchase of Time Incorporated, Sheldon Adelson buying the major newspaper in Nevada. And if we lose that fundamental of a free press, we are already well down that hill, that Sisyphean hill. The second, which is one of the reasons that we're all here today, is the attack on the independent judiciary. And that's something, of course, that for Trump goes back to the period before the election, but has continued afterward with the so-called judges, with the great fear that he will basically spurn the judiciary itself. But it also includes another reality, which is an unholy alliance with a Senate unwilling to use its power of advice and consent. And Nan mentioned a judge with no experience, rejected by the ABA as unqualified, rejected unanimously by the ABA. And it's important to note that the ABA has a pretty wide range of people, even when they have, on rare occasions, said that a nominee for a judgeship was unqualified. There was some division. When you get somebody rejected unanimously, and you have somebody who neglected to mention in his disclosure that his spouse is the chief of staff to the president's legal counsel, Don McGahn, who herself has been interviewed by Mueller, and he's being nominated for a judgeship where some of those issues might come in front of him. And you have a Judiciary Committee that just pushes him through. That also tells you something chilling about the reality that we face. It's one thing to have independent judges attacked by a president. It's another thing to infiltrate the judiciary with people who are willing to accept a whole set of conditions that might lead us even further down that path, from voter suppression to other autocratic means. An autocracy usually includes a kind of cult of personality. During the campaign, of course, we saw Donald Trump talking about how only I can fix it. But that includes now Trump talking about the State Department and the refusal and failure to fill most of the key positions in that department, and saying it doesn't matter at all. I'm the only one who matters. You put all of those things together and you have warning signals everywhere. And perhaps the most chilling thing that I have seen in the last year or so was an exhibit at the Holocaust Museum, which looks at the 12 signs of an emerging fascism. And you look at that exhibit and you go down through it and it's like check, check, check. And it's something that all of us have to be both aware of and recognize that it doesn't happen overnight, but you have to battle every day to keep that from happening. Now, kleptocracy. We have never seen an administration with less of a concern about ethical behavior and more of a willingness to use the office of the presidency and of the positions around the president for personal enrichment. And that not only includes the president's unwillingness to detach himself from his own financial holdings and to set up a faux arrangement with his children. It also includes his son-in-law with an official position in the White House and his family using their position to enrich themselves in dealings with China, his daughter with an official position in the White House continuing to hawk her own goods, and the staff doing those things, and of course a president who not only basically has violated the law from his first day in office by holding on to his hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue, the Trump International, who even today made a commercial in his appeal for the tax bill in St. Louis for his hotel in the former post office building, something which directly violates the Second Emoluments Clause of the Constitution and violates his own lease and the law, but who also has gone over to and praised dictators from Turkey to the Philippines in places where he has deep financial dealings and has created a climate where in China, giving him trademarks and giving his daughter trademarks not only curries favor but also sends a warning signal that if he pursues policies they don't like, those trademarks might disappear. All of those things that were on the minds of the framers when they drafted a constitution that included two very explicit emoluments clauses violated on a daily basis. But let's face it, the framers believed that they were creating a system that would keep us from having a president like Donald Trump. It was very much on the minds of people like Alexander Hamilton, who wrote regularly about his concern about Aaron Burr, but more generally about the possibility of having a president who would not act in the national interest, who would not have values or principles, and creating a system with checks and balances. An electoral college at the start that was supposed to be responsible, sober individuals who would actually get together and keep somebody like this from achieving the presidency, something that went away a long time ago, but that was built fundamentally around having a check and balance with an independent Congress and that independent judiciary. And when I look at what the president has done in a naked kleptocracy and what we see with his cabinet members using the government for their own financial purposes, and a Congress that has held how many hearings on any of these things? House and Senate, a big fat zero. It tells you that the system that was set up to keep us from having a president careening out of control is failing us. And it's another reason why we have to look much more broadly. This is not a Trump problem. It's a Republican problem with a Republican Congress and with leadership that is failing us at every turn as well. Now, kakistocracy. Kakistocracy is a term that was originated in the 17th century and fell into disuse, and it comes from a Greek word that means directly government by the least and most unscrupulous among us. And if you ask a kid what the word kaka means, you'll know where it comes from. And it's back, and it really means the worst kind of government. Now, you can talk about the kakistocracy, and that tells us something about the unscrupulous nature of the people who are there, but it's also a really bad governance. And the fact is that we have a process now which is undermining the rule of law and undermining fundamental policies that have been in place, that is not concerned with actually running a government, that has a budget director who started with a plan, and this is the administration plan, that was going to take money from the Federal Emergency Management Administration, FEMA, to pay for the wall with Mexico, that was going to eliminate the weather satellites at the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration because they would give us information about the weather, which would mean about the climate. Now, think about it. It basically means that you're going to take away the early warning system when hurricanes and other natural disasters will occur, so people can't plan in advance. And then you're going to cut away their ability to deal with the disasters that occur afterwards. That was going to eliminate funding, substantial funding for the Coast Guard so that it could pay for the wall, as if having a wall would keep other threats, including the natural disasters, from taking place, was going to cut 15% from the Centers for Disease Control, which is the fundamental organization that deals with pandemics, which through the course of human history have occurred almost like clockwork every 100 years. The last one, which killed more Americans than World War I and World War II combined, the Spanish flu, was in 1917. That's kakistocracy. When you refuse to nominate somebody to do the census and then put in as the non-Senate confirmable executive director a man whose academic work was in how you can use voter suppression to win elections, and then basically let that person, not even going through the minimal check and balance of at least having Democratic senators ask some tough questions, and keep it going indefinitely, that's kakistocracy. And you could look at Rex Tillerson systematically destroying the State Department. Nobody in place, including ambassadors in critical countries like, let's just pick one example at random, South Korea at this particular moment. No assistant secretaries or deputy secretaries. A Department of Health and Human Services whose kleptocratic secretary had to resign and for months has been led by a deputy assistant secretary because no other official was in place, had been confirmed for that position. That's government of the worst sort by the worst among us. And all of those things are challenges, and they will become even greater challenges if we get this horrific tax bill combined with the kinds of budget cuts that will have to accompany it. And keep in mind that if this tax bill goes into effect and it does not have the magic elixir of reducing deficits, there will be automatic severe budget cuts in programs from food stamps to Medicare to Medicaid. And if you do not even have a government with professionals in place to help to mitigate the damage, it will be far more severe on most of the people of America. Those are challenges that we all face. Now, I looked at this over the last 10 years and longer. My colleague and longtime writing partner, who's a co-author on this book, Tom Mann, and I, back in 2006, did a book called The Broken Branch, Decrying the Decline of Congress. And there, we put some blame on both parties. By 2012, when we did a book called It's Even Worse Than It Looks, that was heralded by a piece in the Outlook section of the Washington Post that the editor very presciently and appropriately titled, "Let's Just Say It, the Republicans Are the Problem." We took a different position than we had taken. And we looked at the world and said it would be easy for us to fall back into the both sides mentality. And we could keep all of our friends and we could keep our positions, but what are we here for? And I will tell you that I personally was very much affected by a conversation I had years ago with the former Congressman Chris Shays, who had, just before this, taken on evil Tom DeLay in the Republican caucus in the House and was met with a vicious reaction by his colleagues. And I said to him, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "You know, my wife Judy, every time we have one of these tough decisions, says to me, 'What are you here for? If you're not going to do the right thing, just get out and make some money.'" And I thought from that, what am I here for? If I've built up some capital and credibility over the years that I've been doing this stuff, now's the time to use it. And 2012 was a time when it was a clarion call, I'm afraid a clarion call that was ignored or rejected by much of our mainstream press that continues to fall back on the false equivalence and both sides mentality, despite reality sticking them in the face and hitting them repeatedly day after day after day. But that now, I think, is a reality that more and more people are confronting. And I would say that I'm here at this podium tonight first because when Nan Aaron asks you to do something, you do it. But more than anything else, and besides the great opportunity to honor one of the great champions of social justice of our time, Bill Vanden Heuvel, it's to honor what the Alliance for Justice has done with its enormous coalition of 100 groups, but also to issue that clarion call to all of us. If we don't step up now, all of us, if we aren't willing to go that extra mile and get everybody we know to go that extra mile, and we're seeing a heartening reaction from so many forces out in the society, lawyers who have stepped up to the plate with the travel ban, with the immigration injustices being done. And just as an aside, every time I see a reaction to General Kelly as the grown-up in the room, I think back on the grown-up who took over the Department of Homeland Security and unleashed these horrible, sadistic people to do these terrible things out there. These are the grown-ups. I'd rather have kids. But I've seen lawyers who've gone back to do a crash course on immigration law to do pro bono work. We see groups that have been designed around reforming the political system or trying to do something about social justice upping their game. And all of us need to move a little bit further. And among other things, we have to confront a reality frontally. And that includes a reality as we look at a Senate with a group of Republicans, many of whom have been our friends, many of whom we've seen as being reasonable people, casting horrible, unreasonable votes, acting in unison. When I saw a Senate that had a nominee for the Environmental Protection Agency, Scott Pruitt, lie to the Senate committee and say that none of the emails that were on his private email account when he was Attorney General in Oklahoma had anything to do with official business. Emails that had been basically kept private by the court. And when the judge in Oklahoma said we're going to release all of those emails on a particular day, Mitch McConnell jammed through that confirmation 3 days beforehand. Everybody knew he lied. All of those Republicans voted for him. And then the emails came out proving that he had lied. If we don't call these people to account, even if it means losing friendships, we are not doing our job. If we let them confirm judges who are not only extreme, but are utterly unqualified for their job, and that's either or both of those. And we don't call out those who vote out of tribal identity or fear of being attacked by Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity or Donald Trump himself. We are not doing our job. And if we don't call out Republicans who vote for a tax bill that will both destroy our economy and destroy government as we know it, which has been rejected and basically condemned by almost every significant group, from the Congressional Budget Office to the Joint Committee on Taxation to virtually all reputable economists who have not completely sold out, and we let them get away with voting for that thing, we are not doing our job. So I say to all of us, as we honor the Alliance for Justice, which has done its job for so long, let's all up our game. And thank you very much.